Could you pass them?
Oh my goodness, 1%. Can someone give me their phone to time? Thank you.
And I'll do what's it called, so everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Just don't say to save me.
Yeah. All right. I'm Quinn. All right. And as we say, 30 meters. My time says now. We are facing a climate crisis. Sea levels are rising. The earth is getting warmer. It barely snows anymore up here in Vermont. And we need to find a way to solve this problem. So this house, as the global environmental movement, would prioritize, in terms of resources and focus, youth protests over other forms of environmental activism. First off, I would just like to say that we stand by the Greta Thunbergs of the world with this motion. And secondly, I would like to define specific aspects. So first off, the global environmental movement is the global environmental movement. And we're prioritizing youth protests. Protests are things like boycotts, they are sit-ins, they are walk-ins, they are marches, they are school walkouts, and they are strikes. Those are the ways that we are defining protest. This is in comparison to like eco-terrorism or lobbying or directly running for office. And so we think that this is not only necessary to prioritize youth protests over other forms of environmental activism to kind of solve the climate crisis, but it is the best solution in order to solve the climate crisis. So we see this, not right now, we see two big questions. How do we grow the environmental movement? And thereby, how do we solve the climate change issue? And focusing on youth and protest, we can do both of those things. So first, growing the environmental movement and why the youth are specifically necessary for this. So the youth is an essential commodity. Not only are the majority of the people in this world, in the globe, are young people right now, especially look at like rising population rates in second and third world countries around the world, but the majority of the people alive today are in their younger ages. And so we think that this is an essential commodity. We think that therefore if we target youth protests, if we get young people out there protesting for the environment, we are getting the majority of people in the world interested in the environmental cause. And why is this important? Why is it important that we get the majority of the people on this planet interested in the environment? Well, it's important because if the majority of the people change their practices, then we can possibly start to solve the problem of climate change. If you target the majority of the people in the world to come and participate in a protest, they are more likely to adopt the practices that are environmentally friendly and sustainable. Now, I'll take your POI.
Are you saying that these youth protests are limited solely to youth who are actually protesting?
Yeah, we are limiting this solely to youth who are protesting as well as people who are in support of the protest. So youth protest is like, if I want to share a picture on Facebook that is like, you know, the Blue Sudan youth protest that I was talking about, like the violent girl in Sudan, that is a form of protest. We're talking about social media protests as well as physical in-person protests. And we think that this is incredibly important because not only are the youth the majority and focusing on these people is necessary in order to change people and their cultural practices, but we think that this is also in first world countries in which you have a say in what happens in government. This is the necessary voting base that you need to target in order to enact change. So if any of your side of the house comes up here and talking about how it's incredibly necessary to elect people into office or lobby the government, the bedrock for them is the youth. The bedrock for that, for your link there, is the youth turnout. The only way that you can get people to turn out to vote in order for environmental causes is by getting them to participate in other civic ways. This is, you know, the classic Robert Putnam civic engagement that you learn about in political science. If people are participate in a protest, they are like 10 times more likely to go vote in the polls. And so not only are you creating a culture of people through protest, you're creating friends with other people who are interested in the environment. You guys decide to carpool with each other, to protest. You decide to adopt environmentally sustainable practices. You all buy the same analogy. Not only by hanging out with these people who are interested in the same causes do you adopt these practices that do help to change the environment, but you're also creating a dedicated voting base that votes for environmental legislation and environmental issues. So then you get the policy, you get people elected into office who want to change, who are running on a platform that is pro-environment, that is pro-sustainability. And so we think that because of these things, not only do you grow the environmental movement, but you have concrete changes by creating a culture of young people who are the majority, who are starting to change their way by either carpooling, by using less water, by using a reusable water bottle, by doing little things, or by voting in favor of specific legislation that supports environmental improvements, such as like carbon taxes, or expanding the scope of the EPA, for example. But on the second point, why protest specifically is so important is because protest is very unique in that it is one of the places in which a majority of people can come together with the same interest. And when a majority of people come together with the same interest, you establish social connections with each other. And protest becomes something that is very, like, in the modern day, kind of like, it's kind of cool to go to a protest nowadays, and like to post that to social media and to share that with other people. And we think that because of this, because protest is seen as like a cool thing, because in the modern day, protest is seen as something, you're like supporting a cause, you're living for a cause, you're imbuing your life with meaning and purpose. We think that protest is very unique, and because it has all of these like this allure to it, it is the most impactful for drawing people in and enacting change in the climate. But also, protest is unique, and it's unique in targeting youth in that, so you can also create a culture that is lasting and permanent by targeting youth and youth protests specifically. Because the future of our world is the next generation, and if you start by targeting youth protests and creating this culture in which people really care about the environment, this will follow on and feed into the next generation. And the only way by truly changing the climate change crisis is not making people who are old and are about to die care, but it's really making the people who are young care. And when people who are young, like Greta Thunberg, are out there marching in their schools or walking out of their schools and inspiring other kids to do the same, those kids' parents become invested in what their kids are interested, right? Like you go to your kids' soccer games because your kid loves to play soccer. You'll go to your kids' school march out because they're interested in saving the environment. As a parent, you're more likely to be invested in the same things that your kids are doing. And I think it's also a lot more moving sometimes to see a 7-year-old girl march out of her school in favor of environmental activism than it is to see an old man with a sign on the side of the road with burning or something like that. And for all those reasons, we're proud to propose. Okay, how do I start this? There we go. Okay.
We thank the speaker for her eloquent remarks, and we now call to the floor to give a 7-minute speech. The leader of the opposition. You're here. Don't forget to say your name.
Hi, I'm Kevin, and I am hereby to present as the head of the opposition about why we should not prioritize youth activism over other types of environmental activism. As the opposition, we also believe that the effectiveness of the protests are the most important aspect of it. And therefore, we should always prioritize the effectiveness or the possible effectiveness of these protests. And I would hereby demonstrate why it is ineffective if the movement is solely participated and led by the youth people. So first, climate change is now a very important issue. Our resources are depleting. Hundreds of millions of people are suffering from poor air quality and other environmental issues. It has become a global health issue right now. But the thing is, can we change this issue just by letting the youth to participate and lead these important movements that are related to all humans on this planet? We believe that we need a holistic view on this problem because the environmental issue is by itself a holistic problem. It is affecting all aspects of our society, from the air to our waters to our forests to our animals to everything. But the focus of the youth people can many times be very limited. And they're limited because of the following reasons. They're inexperienced, they are many times impulsive, and they are fragile because they are easy to be affected by many social changes. So first, they are very inexperienced because we define the youth as the people who are under the voting age. And that's what actually makes the difference between the youth and the adults. So their lack of social experiences because these people are usually still at school, so they have zero social experience. All they have learned about environmental problems are what they learned from school. And this will lead to biases and incomprehensive views towards many environmental issues. Some environmental issues may be more attractive to the youth people, but it does not mean that they are more important than the others. To solve the environmental issue as a whole and to ensure the effectiveness of our protest, we need to ensure that all aspects are considered during the process. Yes?
Okay, so we aren't saying that we cannot do both youth protests and other forms of activism. We can still be holistic. All we're saying is that we're prioritizing specifically youth activism, in addition to other things.
Yes, but if we are prioritizing one aspect or a few aspects that are only attracting the youth people, it does not mean that we are effectively solving the issue. And it does not necessarily mean that the protests will be effective as a result. And also, the youth are inexperienced, so that they have a lot less power in terms of influence. Because while we say that we would like to imagine our society as a purely liberal and egalitarian one where everyone's voices are heard, but the thing is, many important decisions are made by major power institutions. And the youth people do not have a place in these power institutions because they are not working yet. And therefore, they do not have the right to vote, and they're not involved in these decision-making process of these power institutions. So, while they are protesting, but not right now, do they have the power to make real changes? I highly doubt that. And also, the youth people can be very impulsive, and so they can go to extremes many times. And we have seen this many times in history too. And I would like to make an example of La Movida Madrileña in the history of Spain. It was not an environmental protest, but it was a social protest. So Spain was going to democracy after the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, and the youth were very impulsive, and they were trying to promote democracy and liberty. And this is supposed to be a good thing, right? But the thing is, they decided to do it in the way of taking drugs and having sex without any sorts of protection. And this led to very serious public health issues in Spain. And that was why the youth can be very fragile in these periods of social changes. During these periods of social changes, the youth are very fragile, and they can react to it in very extreme ways. And this does not necessarily lead to positive outcomes of their protests. However, we are not saying that all protests with the youth are always ineffective. What we're saying is that we need to incorporate the youth in order to use their power to bring more people into our society. And we do agree on that. But the thing is, if the movement is solely led by the youth, we do not have a clear management or the logic or the means to effectively manage this protest or to see the issue objectively. And that is why we would oppose the prioritization of the youth protests. And we believe it is better if we incorporate a broader view of everyone from the society when we consider who we should put into these protests. Thank you very much. That will be my speech.
Thank the speaker for their honorable remarks, and we call to the floor the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hello, I'm Hajara.
You got it.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems like side opposition is misconstructing what we are saying as side government. We're not saying that by prioritizing youth protests or by prioritizing mainly youth, that we're not also looking at other alternative way of activism. We're saying that we want to prioritize youth because we see that that's where we can maximize the results. That's where we can find the biggest results that's coming from climate change and climate law, changing climate law. They went on to report everything we said without giving any alternative. They didn't give us any other way that we can talk about that. They didn't give us any other way we can resolve this issue. And we as our government is saying that the best possible way to prioritize this issue or to resolve this issue is by prioritizing young protests. And why we think that? First, we think that the youth is the most important part of the population that we think we can actually target and actually make a lasting, not only the biggest impact, but also the lasting or the longest impact. That's why we're prioritizing the youth. Why we're prioritizing protests specifically, we think that because protest is the way we can raise the most awareness, the way people can change things is the way to go in order to resolve climate change issues. First, I'm going to talk about a little bit of rebuttal. They first started saying that, oh, youth are inexperienced, fragile, but also they started defining youth as anyone under 18. I'm over 18 years old. I don't consider myself as old. I cannot even drink yet, but then you consider me inexperienced. You consider me so adult that I cannot, we're not targeting you. Yes, I'll take you.
Yes, so you say that like youth is not defined strictly to people who are like under 18 or around that age, but then you cite Greta Thunberg and like the school walkouts where most people who are not in college or limited to college as well, it's a very small amount of the population that are like under 22.
It's a very small amount of population that are under 22, but still it doesn't mean it's the only part of the population that are young. Yes, those people are young, but people also under 30 are also young. But even if we consider those people who are less under 18, we still consider that those people are rational human beings because they can make decisions. They talk on and talking about that youth are inexperienced because those people are only talking or hearing about climate change only in school. Let me tell you something. People in developing areas, people who are experiencing the Flint water crisis, those people are experiencing firsthand how climate change is impacting people, or people who are experiencing hurricane, a 15-year-old who is experiencing any hurricane, those people know that it's because of climate change. They don't have to learn it from school. And a lot of developing people living in developing worlds, those people, maybe they're not going to school, but they are experiencing the shortage, the found shortage of drought any annual year. So it's not only because they are learning it from school, but they are experiencing firsthand, and then they can talk about it. But also, they talk about how youth cannot make real change because they cannot voting, but they cannot vote. Even if they cannot vote, and we are still assuming, even though we disagree, that youth is only under 18. Even if they cannot vote, those people can influence their older voter who are 18 years old, or older sisters to vote, their older siblings. They can influence their parents to vote. They can influence their friends who are older than them to vote. By voting, you're actually influencing the legislation. You're actually influencing the policy that's happening within a specific country or a specific region. They do act in extreme ways. They talk about it a lot, how youth are fragile and they act in extreme ways. And he gave this example out of Spain. But also, let me talk. A lot of adults act in extreme ways. Can we talk about how over-extracting world resources is not extreme? Why isn't that extreme in a sense? So we think that either side of the age spectrum, people can act in extreme way, and this is not a sufficient argument to say that we shouldn't prioritize youth progress. But I'm going to go to rebuild our case and why we think that youth is the most important thing. The first speaker of the government already talked about how youth is the majority of the world population. Maybe in some European countries the age is a little bit older, but for example, we take most of the developing world where people are experiencing radical climate change. Those people are mostly under the age of 15 years old. And more than 50% of the population is under the age of 15. Those people are experiencing first-hand climate change. They are the people who will be the most affected and also spread. There will be a lot of people who will be affected by that. So we think that by targeting the biggest part of the population, we're having the biggest impact, we're having the most effective impact. But also those people are the ones who will be, on average, living longer. A younger person of 15 or 17 years old will be living longer than a 50-year-old making decisions from them. Those people will be experiencing why the climate will be how it is in 2030 or in 2040. So those people would have more incentive to actually change the climate situation right now and having a lasting impact. As Quinn talked about how when we target youth population, when they raise awareness and they know how their activities and daily actions are impacting the climate, they are more likely to change those actions. They are more likely to live a more different lifestyle, which is going to better our climate situation than it is right now. But also those young people are going to push for innovative resources and innovative products, because this is going to our second point, how youth, because they are the majority of the population, they will be the next people that the big businesses or big corporations are going to target in terms of consumerism. And because those people are going to consume, they would like to consume things that are environmentally conscious. They would like to consume things that are made properly without exploiting our world out of their resources. So those people, because they are the biggest part of the population, they will be targeting and they will be making the market decisions because they have the most impact. So if they change their lifestyle, if they change the way they're thinking about the world, if they say, hey, I would like to have a solar panel and actually using oil sources of technology, those people, we will be pushing the world in a more innovative way of actually solving the climate challenge, in a more innovative way to find products to think. And why, I will just go a little bit and concerning why protest is the best form of activism. What is the best form of activism? As they talk about it, because it raises awareness, right? If you make a lot of noise about something, about an issue, a lot of people will know. And the young people have hold of social media. They are the primary consumer of those type of media. And by only clicking share or clicking like, those people will be touching hundreds and thousands of people in one click. So it goes really fast, and it goes people raising questions and have more awareness about how climate is impacting our world right now. And as Quinn talked about, it creating a bonding and mutual understanding of the young population. It makes them to have a common ground to come together and to talk about. And because we believe that the young is the most important part of our population, and we need to save and have a sustainable future, we are so incredibly proud to propose.
We thank the speaker for their honorable remarks, and we call for the deputy leader of the opposition to give their speech. Here, here. Honorable panel, today, OO agrees with OG that in terms of that the global climate crisis is a necessary issue and a pressing issue that needs to be solved at the current moment. Where the difference comes into hand is the method of solving this global crisis. The burden on side government that they have to prove why youth protests are the most effective form of environmental activism to actually solve the global climate crisis. In my speech, I'm going to start with some rebuilding our points, with some integrated rebuttal, some extraneous rebuttal, and then weighing the round. That's why OO takes the round. So first to start, right? With any movement at all, right? Whether it's environmental, whether it's civil rights movement, there's a limited amount of political capital, right? That there's only so much resources and so much focus that a movement can put into actually solving the issue and within different parts of that movement, right? So what this means is that the global environmental movement only has so many resources and focus. So SciGov has to prioritize the majority of that to go to the youth. So yes, maybe there's going to be some other other methods of environmental activism on their side of the house, but they're going to be very small, and they're not going to have like a lot of resources at all. So essentially, what Gov has to prove is that by putting all the chips and all their money into all the eggs in one basket with these youth protests, we're going to be able to most effectively solve for environmental activism. And the fact of the matter is that it's not the right method. So to reiterate what Kevin said, right? First of all, we explained, and we agree with government, how pressing of an issue this is, right? There are forecasts that predict that, like, within the next decade, if we don't fix what we're doing now, climate change is going to be irreversible, and the planet's going to die, right? This is a pressing issue that needs to happen. So why are youth the most capable to lead this movement, right? They're inexperienced as individuals, they're young, they haven't fully gone through the process of school and learning about the environment, learning about different things, their brains aren't, completely fully developed, but even if we buy the argument from Gov that the youth are able to really motivate people and they're young and so they get people interested. What's the effect of this, right? Side government talks about how the youth protests are they're the cool thing to do. Great. What has the protest done so far? The school walkout happened. What's going to happen in the UN? What's going to happen in the U.S. and Congress to actually affect for change to happen? Right. We saw this with the gun violence reform movement that was led by the youth. Big turnout, big support by many other youth members. Nothing happened. No change happened at all legislatively that would have actually solved the issue to happen. Yeah, I'll take over.
During the civil rights movement, young people from school led those civil rights in order to raise awareness for people to vote. People like Martin Luther King to go to march. They raise awareness, they make people motivated, legislation change. Why wouldn't you think that the same thing would happen for the environmental justice?
Okay. Thank you. Well, first of all, Martin Luther King Jr. was the biggest and most successful leader in the civil rights movement. He was not a youth. He was a married man with a child who was in the church. Based on your definition of youth and how you use Greta Thunberg and school walkouts, this is severely limited to individuals who are in school, college at the highest level, which is 22 years old. So it's not super like Martin Luther King Jr. civil rights movement doesn't really apply in terms of youth, right? So to go back into our argument, they're not in the political process. They can't vote. So this whole argument that SciGov makes about they're going to be the voting population who are going to go to vote. Maybe the 14-year-olds in 4 years they'll be able to vote, and then they'll be able to eventually elect people into the legislative body who can then, after a couple of years, put into action legislation. But by that point, it will be too late for anything to actually be put in place. No, not at this moment. That will reverse the climate crisis at the current moment, right? So there's going to be no real effect from this. In addition, if they grow the movement, the change is going to be kind of marginal. And as Kevin stated, youth protests can even backfire with this example. So to go into our second main argument is that on our side of the house, we have a broad array of activism that has better chances of success. On our side of the house, it's not like youth protests are eliminated. There can still be youth protests, and youth can participate in other forms of protests. But there's a lot of other options. There's lobbying to actually try to affect people who are in office to actually make legislative change to to combat the climate crisis. You have non-youth protests that can draw maybe a broader array of people, including youth members, which on their side of the house, they are limited strictly, as the Prime Minister said in their speech, to youth protesters, or to only youth protesters, or even just protests led by youth. No, I'm not taking any more POIs. Okay, so, and even, we even have eco-terrorism at our tips, which is maybe extreme, but since the crisis is so pressing at the moment that if we don't do anything, we're going to be an irreversible change, like, we're willing to bite the bullet of maybe even eco-terrorism just to make sure that we have some kind of change to actually reverse this massive global climate crisis, right? And so now to kind of, so on our side of the house we have this broad array, and you have multiple different ways of trying to attack a crisis at the same time, where you can kind of spread your resources a bit and tap into different sources of the population. You have a greater chance for people to get interested and involved and success to actually happen, rather than just targeting the youth. To get into some rebuttal of their case, their main point is we grow the environmental movement. First of all, this idea of youth, like, yeah, okay, maybe let's buy that you grow the movement by youth. Youth, as I said, aren't going to have a real effect in the legislative process, which is where most of the probably counteraction to climate crisis is going to be important. And even if you do grow it and people go out and protest, there's no real effect, as I said. We haven't seen like a single effect in like any major body that's actually going to affect people, right? And they're certainly not affecting like adult individuals who are in power at the moment, right? Like maybe even like on our side of the house, adults might not affect them as well, but like there's nothing, you provide no linkage to why youth actually do a better job of this. And their second argument is that it becomes more effective, and the only real linkage is that like it gets people in, and that it's going to be lasting and permanent, and that even like it's mentioned that that the youth are like the people who it's going to affect. Like if we're going to talk about like the principled argument of the people who are going to be the people who are affected by the climate crisis should be the ones leading the protest, we should focus on people who are being affected right now, like regions of drought. But the principal case doesn't even matter because it's just about what's the best way to fix it, right? So if you look at like what's going on in this debate, the way what we've told you versus what OG told you, OO takes it because we provide an actual better mechanism for a real change to be effected through multiple sources to combat the climate crisis, and while OG only really shows you why youth are like a good way to draw people in, maybe, and like a principled way to look at it. For these reasons, we're proud to oppose. Thank you. Thank the speaker for their honorable remarks, and we call to the floor the member of government. Here, here. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna go. Like,
Oh.
you're gonna go.
Also, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Justin. Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm Cynthia. I am a member of government. It's very good. Okay, sorry. Right, honorable panel, so first I'd like to just give some more explicit comments about how you should be weighing or judging this round. So we're taking on the role of global environmental movements, but no one has really explicitly stated what's in their best interest besides just growing the movement. So I'm gonna first more explicitly lay that out for you. So we think that it's in their best interest to see the most tangible change towards sustainability. So what does this look like? One, it means that we want to see change in either policy or change in behavior towards renewable energy and so forth. So how do we get that? One, we get the most numbers on our side. Or two, we get the more credibility on our side. And three, more funding on our side. So these are the main three criteria that we'll be judging this round in terms of who will be seeing the most change and the most effective change. So one, by prioritizing youth people, we think that this established a new credibility. So why does this matter? Because right now, in the current status quo, in terms of getting the change we want to see, people are not, there's this incredible skepticism about even believing in climate change. Also in terms of people are just not trusting the logic behind why we should act on climate change in terms of like the stats that's provided. So we think that by prioritizing youth and like marketing the youth, we're going to be appealing to more emotional aspects, and we think that by appealing to pathos in terms of soliciting sympathy in this under the status quo, that way we can see the most change, because when there's like skepticism in terms of that, and we think that because in current candidates that are like in current people that are like doing activism, we think that they lacks credentials because they have other incentives such as getting funding from a particular organization or getting re-elected for office, whereas when we have the imagery of a child, well not a child, but like of the youth, it's more pure and they're known to be more honest. And we think that can solicit more credibility in overall towards environmental activism group. So, and we're establishing more credibility through kids, so then we can check more numbers on our side, and then more numbers, of course, then like will lead to more funding. Not right now. And then two, we think you get the most long-term impact on our side in terms of longevity. And how do we see that? Because right now, what's happening under policy changes that we see this uneven, we don't see a smooth transition of political power. So let's say you have Obama implement some policy change. As long as when somebody new is re-elected, you see like a policy reversal. So you don't see sustainable change in terms of environmental actions. So, but then by targeting the youth from to begin with, and then by educating people at a younger age, you get more consensus on our side. And when these people are going to be the people that will be occupying seats in Congress, are going to be inspiring people like to go out to vote. When there's more consensus on our side, you can now get more sustainable and more smooth transition of power and policy towards environmental goals. I'll take Yasmin.
There are people who are already of age to vote and that are already in the government, so why are you targeting children specifically who probably have 20 years until they're able to create a change themselves?
Okay, so we're prioritizing youth protests, but this is not saying it's only limited to the youth. It's like mentioned by OG, it's also people who support youth protests, so it can be like adults who also attended the climate strike that was like inspired by Greta, like someone who's like considered younger. So it's not, I think there's like also this misconception about who we're really talking about in this round. By prioritizing, we're not saying we're only limited to the youth, but rather when we're choosing to allocate our resources, and what it's really going to look like is that we're going to be dedicating more media attention to youth protests rather than like normal environmental activism. That is like the real world that we're talking about, and not just about the way that OO has shaped the world for us. So back to my point, you get more like long-lasting policy on our side because of the greater transition of more even, more sustainable and this better transition of power. And two, you also get more immediate change on our side. So how do you see that? Well, we've been talking about Greta, forgot her last name, but in terms of like the global climate strike that she has inspired, we have not seen numbers and turnouts like that from the normal environmental activism groups. So already these are clear examples of how by prioritizing and marketing youth protests, you've been seeing more numbers. And now, especially in the time where we see re-election coming up, we think this is particularly important under the status quo, given that now they are more aware of the issues. They can vote more actively and think about more actively about who they want to vote for in the next election. Yes,
okay, so if scientists who are climate scientists and can scientifically prove that climate change is happening can't convince voters and legislators to pass legislation and to enact stuff to combat climate change, why are children going to be?
Yeah, that's exactly why we need this, because people don't believe in people don't really just trust numbers. And you look at youth, people who are younger and now their energy and their energy can kind of take on this kind of idle imagery to inspire people to take on actions. And especially look at YouTubers who it's you can see YouTubers now taking on a powerful position because of the mass influence that they have. So we think that younger people, because of their skills with social media and their energy and their credibility, can now attract this new wave of people who are to get interested in policy change. And also just a quick rebuttal to how the younger people with less experience, we shouldn't trust them. But we think that there are plenty of adults who are uneducated about this, this aspect as well. And we don't think that we should be basing credibility solely on this arbitrary age of 18 of who should be mature enough to talk about climate change and stuff. So I'm just gonna go over what exactly has CG done for you in this round. One, we have, well, me, there's no we, it's just me. we have explicitly addressed the interest of this debate in terms of the actor that we are taking on, and showing you how you should be just like the interest in how you should actually be judging this round in terms of who will give you the most numbers of credibility and funding. And then to even though OG does like touch on this about like growing awareness and like numbers and growing the movement, we think that on CG we have provided clear links and impacts on doing so, and also we've shown you like the long-term impacts on our side, how you get better of that on our side, and also like how we'll get the most immediate short-term change on our side as well, and why in the status quo, because of like the uneven policy change, people are scared of policy reversal. You need more consensus, and you will get that on our side. And with that, we're proud to propose.
We thank the speaker for their honorable remarks, and we call to the floor to give their 7-minute speech, the member of opposition. You're here.
On our panel, I would like to come with an extension and some rebuttal explaining how both openings and CG have forgotten some important points in this motion. First of all, no one is talking about why the motion or the movement is failing. For example, voting power. Although they were saying how kids can help adults change their mind, kids are not the ones, or the youth are not the ones who have voting power. The people with the voting power tends to be the adults. The adults are the ones that are of age right now and can make a change right now, whereas the kids are not the ones to be doing that. We'd also like to mention money. No one was mentioning in the motion, it talks about having resources and focus, and a lot of the resources comes from having money. Older people may not have time to protest, but they do have the money to help fund other environmental activism opportunities. Older people are the ones with the money, and that money is a resource that the global environmental movement would need, is money. We'd also like to talk about how they're only focusing on youth protests when there's, and just youth, when there's many people who care about the environment, and there's also other forms of activism. We'd also like to say how there's a lack of support from the old, because you're only targeting the youth. You think that you can make a change by having the youth, but if you're only targeting the youth and you're not targeting the old, then you're not getting, or the older people, then you're not getting support from the old. You're not getting the resources that you need, which is the money. The money, you're not getting that. The voting power, you're not getting that because you're not helping prioritize getting a larger demographic of people to help with this movement. And we'd also like to say how we want the same outcomes as government, such as we want the environment to get better, but we also have, when you also target the old, we also have voting power and we have money. And so we'd like to mention that there's also the fact that because you're only prioritizing youth protests, you're not talking about the other protests. You're only saying why the youth is good in helping with environmental change, but nobody's saying why everyone else is also important. You're saying, oh, it's not just for the youth, it's for people who also support the youth, but you're not saying why these people are important. You're saying you're prioritizing the youth. If you're prioritizing youth protests, then you're not looking at the other demographics. We'd also like to mention the main actors in this motion, which would be the adults and the youth. Because youth are often overlooked, it's important to get support from older people because there is a lot of bias in the world today, and having older people, supporting older people and prioritizing their activism as well helps to limit the bias.
Okay, so putting your resources in a variety of different places is actually super ineffective. What's more effective? Poking someone 100 times or stabbing them in the back with a knife? That is the purpose of prioritizing the youth protest. We need to stab this climate crisis in the back with a knife, dude. This is how we win. Anyway.
I understand that you want to prioritize youth, but the thing is, prioritizing the youth, like I said before, will not get you voting power, and it also will not get you money. The youth are not the one with the money, and they're also not the ones with the voting power. And you were saying how, earlier you were saying how you'll get more funding from having, CG was saying how there will be more funding by having the youth because there will be more numbers, but the only way to get more numbers is if you're including everybody, if you're prioritizing everybody. That way you get a larger group of people and you're not only getting youth. They're not the ones that are going to bring the money, and they're not the larger demographic. If you want a large demographic, you're supposed to include everyone in the movement. Anyways. So we'd also like to say how if you want power in numbers, it's important to target families, families and adults and families, because they have social ideas that they do pass along to their children. For example, vegan parents usually raise vegan children. If these parents are also very into activism and environmental activism, they'll pass that on to their children. Social ideas trickle down through generations, and giving them, so if you help prioritize these older people, it'll go down to the youth.
Okay, social ideas also trickle up too. The most malleable are the kids whose brains are currently being wired. They're the most likely for you to be able to change their minds and make them to care about the climate crisis. What is more likely to change like a person who like doesn't believe in gay marriage, like having a gay son, or like, you know, that was a terrible way of phrasing it. It also trickles up in the reverse way. You can make your parents care about the same things you care about. Sorry, my bad. Okay, so shit. Okay.
Like we were saying before, you think that things will trickle up, but the thing is, it's easier to get an adult to give their money to the environmental movement rather than it is for a child to convince their parents to give money to the environmental movement. We'd like to say that targeting adults also targets children because these ideals do trickle down, but targeting children does not target adults. For example, TikTok. Kids are using TikTok, but adults are not using TikTok. You're targeting these children, and it's not. You're targeting these children, and these are not transferring over to adults. We'd also like to say that because you're targeting youth, this is not a child's job. You're basically telling these children it's up to them. They're the focus. You guys have to help this movement change, but it's not a child's job to be changing the environment. It's the job of the people who are already in power, the people who have voting power, the people who have money to help fund these resources. They're the ones that are important in the environmental movement. I'd also like to go into some points of rebuttal that are, CG was saying how we get more funding and more numbers, and I said before, you will not get more funding from having youth, you will not get more funding from having youth You'll not get more funding by prioritizing youth protests. You'll get more funding by targeting adults who have the money to fund you. You're also saying that children are pure and honest and that gives you credibility, but that's using the children. Like I said before, you're using children. You're basically forcing this job upon them when that's not their job. Their job is to go to school, and you're basically forcing this job upon them to work on the environment. You also said that you have not seen numbers in turnout from before, like, have not seen numbers in turnout, like, from the protests that happened recently, but that doesn't satisfy where's the change coming from. And I thought you guys said protests were cool and fun, so this isn't satisfying what change are the youth actually making. You're just basically adding to your point that protests are just cool and fun things to go to, and for this reason you're proud to oppose.
The speaker for their honorable remarks, and we invite all speakers to cross the aisle and shake hands.
Let's see.